Hello friends, welcome to Biology Extrema, where we teach biology from the basics to the extreme. Myself Keshav Bansal, and today we are going to study immunology. In immunology, we are going to study cells of immune system. This is part 2 of this topic, and part 1 we have already discussed. In part 1 we discussed granulocytes, okay, where we studied neutrophils, basophils, mast cells and eosinophils. Okay, in this part 2 we are going to study basically phagocytes, okay, like monocytes, macrophages, dendritic cells, okay, and the rest of the leukocytes we are going to discuss in the subsequent parts. Okay, and if you want to watch these videos, the part 1, okay, or any other topic in English language, so there's a dedicated playlist by the name of immunology in English. Okay, you can go to that playlist and watch the other related videos. Okay, so let's start the topic. So we are talking about cells of immune system. This is part 2, you already know. So let's start with the monocytes. Okay, so first let's look at a concept that, let's say, okay, monocytes, these are the monocytes, okay, and monocytes, they basically circulate in the bloodstream. Monocytes circulate in the bloodstream, okay. They are not found in the tissues. They are not found in the tissues. They are found in the bloodstream. And let's say this is a tissue, and in tissue there is a pathogen, okay. Their pathogen enters in the tissue. So let's say there is an infection in a tissue. So what will happen, that these monocytes, they will migrate from the bloodstream. They will migrate from the bloodstream into the tissues, and when they will migrate from the bloodstream into the tissues, now because in tissues we do not find monocytes, okay, so they will differentiate either into macrophages or into dendritic cells. Okay, what I just said, that monocytes, they circulate in the bloodstream, they are not found in the tissues, and when infection occurs in a tissue, they migrate from the bloodstream into that tissue, where they differentiate into macrophage or dendritic cells. Clear? So we know that macrophages and dendritic cells, they are found in the tissues, they are not found in the circulatory system, basically not in the bloodstream. Clear? So they are tissue resident cells, macrophages and dendritic cells. Clear? Now one more thing that I need to add, that both macrophages, okay, one way for the formation of macrophages, we know that they can form from the monocytes, and same goes for the dendritic cells, that they also can be formed from the monocytes. Okay, but this is, this is not the full picture, complete picture. Okay, only some macrophages may be formed by this phenomena, or some dendritic cells may be formed by this phenomena. Rest of the macrophages, rest of the dendritic cells, they are formed in the tissues. Okay, they were never monocytes. Most of them form from a stem cell. Okay, a stem cell, basically some stem cell lineage, okay, during the process of hematopoiesis. Clear? So we know that, yeah, some of the macrophages and dendritic cells will arise this way by the migration from the monocytes, but rest of the macrophages and dendritic cells, they are tissue resident cells from the beginning. Okay, so they arise or develop through the process of homeostasis there. Clear? So let's now study the characteristics of each type of cell. So monocytes, we all know that all these 3 types of cells are phagocytic cells. Okay, so they all are phagocytic leukocytes. Clear? And we know that they circulate in the bloodstream, and when they migrate into tissue, they either differentiate into macrophages or into dendritic cells. Okay, so this is a very beautiful picture from Cuet. So I think we have done monocytes. Now we'll move forward to macrophages. Okay, so in the case of macrophages, we also, these are also phagocytes, and they are tissue resident. Now, as I just told you, that either they can arise from circulating monocytes, okay, or from the embryonic cells which are present in the tissue. Okay, so in both cases, if we talk about the property, they will act as basically phagocytic cell. Okay, so they will do phagocytosis, and they can do 2 things. one thing you can do for the, especially for the innate immune system activity, that you can phagocytize the pathogen, okay, the particle basically, okay. And another thing you can do that to basically to generate adaptive immune response, because these two are connected, okay. Wait a bit. Adaptive immune response, okay. So both these, they do not happen, you know, differently. They are kind of related, okay. Some cells of the innate immune system, they kind of activate adaptive immune response, like here we will study, and we will study in brief because this is a separate topic. We will study the antigen presenting cells, what these cells are, what they do in detail, okay. So basically what macrophages do, that either they can phagocytize the pathogen, okay, the foreign particle, and kill it there. This is a part of innate immune response, okay. Or what happens to generate adaptive immune response, some of them what can do, they can act as antigen presenting cell. So what will do, they will process this protein, these peptide antigens, okay, and then they will use a molecule on their surface. Let's say I will show you the picture. Let's say this is some peptide, let's say, okay, this is some peptide, and this is our macrophage. It engulfed it, okay. After engulfing, it entered into the macrophage, it got broken into pieces, and then because it has a basically a MHC second complex, okay, APCs, they all have it, okay. So what it will do, that it will release these basically processed peptide antigen, processed, okay. If you don't even understand this now, there's no need to worry. We will discuss this topic separately. We are just discussing, you know, so that you can understand this a bit, okay. So processed peptide antigen, okay. Now it will they are going to bind on this, and from here these peptide antigens will be presented to which cells? T helper cells, okay. T helper cells, and we know that now these T helper cells will initiate the adaptive immune response, okay. So this is how innate immune cells, they kind of trigger the adaptive immune response. So this phenomenon is called antigen presentation, and these are done by specialized antigen presenting cells, which can be macrophages, which can be dendritic cells, and in some cases they can also be B cells, okay. But in the most cases they are macrophages and dendritic cells, okay. So we will study also in the dendritic cells, that they have MHC second complex, due to which they will act as a antigen presenting cell, and they will present antigen to T helper cells only processed peptide antigens, okay. So to initiate the adaptive immune response. So basically, whether they are arising from the circulating monocytes or they are arising from the stem cell in the tissues, they will both do phagocytosis, and they will both act as antigen presenting cells. So I think this much is clear. And one more thing, especially those cells which arise from the embryonic cells, okay. For those cells which arise from monocytes, you know, they are actually these all are macrophages, but those who are arising from the embryonic cells, basically in the stem cells in the tissues, okay, tissue resident macrophages, we provide them a specific distinct name, okay. Let's see what those names are. So here is a list of the tissues, in the tissues which we are talking about. It can be brain, it can be liver, it can be lung, and the name of macrophage, okay, we are referring especially to. So in brain we call it microglia, in lung we call it alveolar macrophage, in liver we call it Kupffer cells, okay. So basically brain one is important, this Kupffer cell is important. In skin we call it Langerhans cells, okay. In spleen, red pulp macrophage. In bone marrow macrophage. In lymph node, subcapsular sinus macrophage, okay. So the microglia is important, the Kupffer cell is important, Langerhans cells is important, okay. And for the rest of the cells, you know that there is already macrophage attached to it, so you can identify that, yeah, it is a type of macrophage cells, okay. And also do remember the site, the tissue, okay. Now we'll talk about the dendritic cells. So dendritic cells is the same case, okay. That these are phagocytic cells. They also have class second MSC molecules, so they can present antigen to T helper cells, therefore acting as antigen presenting cell. Okay, only those cells who use class second MSC molecule to present processed peptide antigens to T helper cells, only those cells are referred to as antigen presenting cells. Okay, because even some cells can present antigen to, let's say, B cells, okay, and they're still doing the antigen presentation, okay, but they're not called antigen presenting cell, because then they aren't using class second MSC molecule to present the antigen. They aren't presenting the antigen to T helper cells, and they aren't basically providing, there are more details, you know, that they aren't necessarily presenting the peptide antigen. Okay, so basically I guess you got the idea. Okay, so now some dendritic cells, they do have a class second MSC molecule, they do have antigen, they do act as antigen presenting cell, and they are phagocytic in nature. Okay, but there are other kinds of dendritic cells which are called follicular dendritic cells. Okay, so they do not arise in the bone marrow. Okay, they are non-phagocytic cells. They do not express class second MSC molecule, and as a result they cannot act as antigen presenting cells. Okay, so what they do, they are found in the lymph node. Okay, they are found in the lymph node, and what they do, they activate B cells. They present antigen to B cells. Okay, that's why, but we cannot call them antigen presenting cell. Okay, because I just explained this process. Okay, so they are presenting antigen but to B cells. Okay, and how they are presenting antigen if they are not using phagocytosis, how they are capturing the antigen? Okay, so what they do, they acquire the antigen by forming immune complexes. Basically they attached, somehow they attach that antigen to the surface by forming immune complexes, and from the surface they present it to B cells. Okay, leading to an adaptive immune response. Okay, so you need to remember this specific case of follicular dendritic cells. Okay, but yeah, most of the dendritic cells, they do act in the basically that typical dendritic way. Claro? So this is all about macrophages, monocytes and dendritic cells. I hope this video is clear. If you understand the topic, please like the video, share it with your friends, and do subscribe the channel. Thank you. See you next time.